this is Chad Brown with Chad Brown Law. I am continuing my sequential evaluation process series where I'm going through the 5-step sequential evaluation process that the Social Security Administration uses to determine if someone is disabled. The first 2 steps are substantial gainful activity, which is a working question. If you make over a certain amount of money per month, on average, you're not allowed to draw disability and you lose at step 1 of the process. If you aren't working at all or you're under SGA, you go to step 2 of the process, which looks at what are called medically determinable severe impairments. And basically, is there something wrong with you that's documented by objective medical evidence by an acceptable medical source? If so, then that's going to get you through to step 3, which is what I want to talk about today. Step 3 of the sequential evaluation process looks at what are called the listings. Now, the listings are simply 14 different sets of regulations that govern common medical problems. And if you meet the listing, you're disabled. So basically what the statute does is it divides your body up into 14 different categories. It's not exact. It's similar to high school biology. That's like what I tell people usually. And in those different categories, you're going to have different considerations that the decision maker or the court's going to look at. So generally, let me draw my board back out here. Generally, what you're going to have with listings are you're going to have common medical problems with a unique level of severity where you have statutory requirements. So, for example, let's talk about, as I take a deep breath, let's talk about breathing. There are a set of respiratory listings for people who have, say, COPD or emphysema, and they're going to go through and take pulmonary function studies. The pulmonary function studies are going to look at things like forced exhalation velocity or lung volume content to see things like how much air can a person take into their lungs, how quickly or powerfully they can push the air out of their lungs. Also, sometimes they look at oxygen exchange in the lining of the lungs, which people can have issues with. The point is that the respiratory listings take specific types of problems, emphysema, COPD, asthma, and then they look at a pulmonary function study, which is a test that has a result, and it has an actual number, and based on your height, if your FVC or FEV1 or DLCO scores are below a certain level, then you automatically get disability, whether you can work or not. And I think the breathing respiratory listing is somewhat easy to understand because there is a specific set of testing that's used, and if your breathing capacity under the pulmonary function study is below a certain level, then you automatically get disability. What's interesting, a lot of people don't understand, is if you meet a listing, you are disabled as long as you get through step 1 and 2 of the process. So sometimes people actually meet a listing, will go to work, and then when they leave work, they will actually immediately become disabled, even though they were just working the day before. Because you have to understand, at step 3, what the decision maker or court is looking at is not your ability to work. They haven't got to steps 4 and 5 where they're looking at past work and they're looking at other work. All they're looking at step 3 are common medical problems with a unique level of severity that have statutory requirements. And if you meet the statutory requirements, you're disabled. In fact, I had a conversation with a gentleman about an insurance-related issue this past week who's actually working, but his job is going to end in April. He clearly meets one of the listings. The fact that he's working is what's keeping him from being able to get disability. So think through this a minute. He actually has a very severe kidney problem and most certainly would meet the listing for kidney problems if he weren't working. The problem is he's losing at step 1. Because he's still working, he makes too much money at step 1 of the process. His countable income is too high. But he certainly has a medically determinable severe impairment. He has end-stage renal disease. And he's working, but the minute he stops working, he's going to become disabled under the listing. In fact, that was the conversation that we had. So one of the things I think it's important to understand about listings is listings are not evaluating your ability to work. They're only looking at the severity of the medically determinable severe impairments that were identified in step 2. Now, most people are not going to meet the listings. They just don't. The level of severity and specificity that the statutes require is very difficult to meet. Most people who meet listings candidly don't end up in lawyers' offices. Sometimes they do. Sometimes we find that the DDS misses listings and people actually met the listing and they were improperly denied. But very often when people meet the listings, they are going to be found disabled early in the process. Important to understand that if you don't meet the listing, it doesn't mean you're not disabled. It just means your specific impairment did not meet the specific statutory requirements of unique severity that were required for them to say you were disabled at step 3. In fact, most people who are found disabled do not meet a listing. They're going to be found disabled at step 4 and 5. But it's really important, if you can meet the listing, you want to try to, because remember, listings don't look at your ability to work. They're only looking at the objective medical impairments that you have. And if you can meet that threshold, you're going to be disabled whether you can work or not. So that's just how the listings work. And I hope that helps.